alone would be non-white students, and we have some of the best results in the country. So, you know, I think one of the main points that I noticed in the abstract that I read was that they mentioned that PE curriculum policy wasn't linked to overall policy of the curriculum. And if you have a look in our curriculum, we're firmly focused on the Treaty of Waitangi. We're focused on cultural diversity and inclusion as the foundations of our curriculum. So, you know, the phys ed curriculum is no different. And to be honest, if we were just teaching football, rugby and swimming, what have you, to be honest, I think the kids would be bored more than anything.
They call it the colonial project of physical education, and they say, for example, students from Muslim backgrounds feel positioned on the margins when religious customs concerning the body are overlooked when, for example, swimming is involved. They do single out rugby, cricket and netball, and they do imply that it's across the whole former empire, Emma. But you're saying the treaty makes a difference here. Can I ask you something? Ethnic dancing, for want of a better phrase, is mentioned here, that, you know, people come to a country and they bring their own physical activity and it's squelched, not recognised. What happens at Avondale College?
Well, I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find a PE department in Auckland especially that didn't acknowledge different cultures and didn't appreciate the things that they bring to the PE curriculum. I know that at Avondale College we have, you know, we really appreciate different cultures and what they can bring to PE.
All right, good to talk with you about it too, and thank you for joining us. Emma joins on the panel. Before we go, Auckland staged the world's third best city for quality of life, third out of 450. From the HR consultancy Mercer. Vienna top once more, Zurich second, Auckland's about as good as Munich. Have you been to those other cities, both of you?
Neither, Vienna nor Munich.
Okay.
I've been to Vienna, but I see, and Munich. I was more interested in the fact that Zurich's apparently, isn't that a top city because wine is cheap, and I was thinking, I want to go there.
Yeah, wine is cheap there. Or is it wine cheap in Geneva? Wine's cheap somewhere. Wellington 15th. Auckland benefits from, well, we know what it benefits from. A subtropical climate, they say. Kaitaia's got the subtropical climate, doesn't it? Do you think you live in a subtropical climate?
Sometimes it feels like that.
Okay. Does Wellington deserve to be 12 places behind? Obvious question.
Well, it's outrageous. You know, obviously it should be ranking ahead of Auckland. You know, it's like this radio program's The Auckland Show, but...
I beg your pardon for a moment. I thought you said... No, go on.
I don't know what I said wrong, but I don't think we deserve to be lower than Auckland. I think we've got a far better quality of life down here, but I'm probably a bit biased.
They always say that in Wellington, don't they? In the latest annual report from The Economist on the cost of living in the world's top cities, oh, you're right, wine is cheap in Zurich, cigarettes are cheap in Seoul, petrol's cheap in Singapore. The most interesting observation is that South Asian cities are no longer the cheapest cities in the world. So things are changing majorly in South Asian cities. I don't have time to ask any more questions about this. Victoria Stewart, thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks
on
for
the
having
Auckland
me.
program. Always a pleasure to have you on. And Jeremy Hansen, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Jim.
That's us, everybody. We are back tomorrow as per usual, and Checkpoints with John Campbell is coming right up.
Ko te mairai hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhiua tonight on Checkpoint. The country's largest general insurance company, IAG, will enforce the June 30 deadline on filing court proceedings against it post-Christchurch. EQC boss Sid Miller responds. Matamata-born businessman Chris Liddell secures a top spot at the White House. Is a total ban on set net fishing on the cards after 5 nationally endangered Hector's dolphins were killed in a single net. The government announces plans for a review, a working group, advisory group or investigation every 4 days since it took power. Zach Fleming counts them up, and veteran activist Penny Bright, who's been in a standoff with Auckland Council for 10 years over unpaid rates, will have her house sold by tender. All of that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. Air New Zealand has warned the government that it will always act independently of the Crown. The Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones has described the airline as a corporate taniwha that was shortchanging the regions. He said if the board thought it could exist in an airtight environment when the company was majority owned by the taxpayer, it was wrong. Mr Jones said Air New Zealand is a $5 billion company that has put profits ahead of services.
They've got this facade of the safety video, cuddly penguins in Antarctica, smiling Maoris at Waitangi, but do what you're meant to be doing. You are servicing New Zealand, and if you're not prepared to service the entirety of New Zealand, don't go overseas and promote New Zealand unless you're practicing what you preach in the provinces.
Shane Jones, the airline's chairman, Tony Carter, said this afternoon that any appearance of a lack of commercial independence is viewed seriously by the board. 5 endangered Hector's dolphins have been killed in a single set net off the east coast of the South Island. The deaths were discovered when a fisher pulled up nets just north of Banks Peninsula. Here's our fishing reporter or fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
Set netting is banned up to 4 nautical miles off the peninsula. It's understood the unique dolphins, which number around 9,000 off the South Island's east coast, were caught just outside this area. A statement from Fisheries Inshore New Zealand on behalf of the fisher says he deeply regrets the capture. It says he's stopped fishing in the area to avoid any further deaths. The Minister of Fisheries and Minister of Conservation are now considering measures to prevent more dolphin deaths, including reviewing the use of set nets in a bid to reduce or phase them out completely. This is Conan Young.
Anger is building in the small New South Wales town of Tathra, where many residents are being kept from inspecting their fire-ravaged properties. Up to 70 homes were destroyed by a fast-moving bushfire on Sunday night. Officials are keeping many property owners away, saying there is an asbestos risk. One local, Tim Ray, says some are finding out about their houses through the media.
What's happening at the bottom of the roadblock at Tathra, right? They're just going, oh, you're Channel 9 or you're Channel 7, I'll go through. So what are we seeing on the news? We're seeing TV people in burnt-out houses explaining, oh, this blah, blah, blah. Where are the people whose house it is? They're here watching it.
Tim Ray says officials should put together a list of affected addresses and distribute it. The British government wants to question the head of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, over what he knows about third-party data collection and how the information is used. The British political research company Cambridge Analytica is accused of mining the data of 50 million Facebook users and then using it to target political advertising, including during the United States presidential election and the Brexit vote. The chair of Britain's Parliamentary Digital Select Committee, Damien Collins, says Mr Zuckerberg has some questions to answer.
We feel very strongly that he should come and speak and answer questions, and so we'll put that challenge to him. So knowing what we now know, I think people are rightly suspicious of any answers Facebook give to questions, and it's time for someone who, hasn't got any excuse that they don't know.
Damien Collins says authorities are also now seeking a warrant to look at Cambridge Analytica's databases and servers. The national bus company GoBus says the ride-sharing service Uber could make the congestion in Queenstown worse. Uber has announced it will expand to Dunedin and Queenstown in May. The resort town has serious traffic congestion, and it's trying to attack with $2 flat bus fares and parking price hikes. 4 months ago, GoBus launched a phone-based shared ride van service called Savvy. Its business development director Russell Turnbull says it regards Uber as just another taxi service.
Uber drivers do tend to circulate around looking for rides, waiting for their next call, and that's something that does create congestion. It doesn't actually solve it. As I say, it's another option. We're watching them. We don't fear them, but we do question whether they're the right thing for Queenstown.
Russell Turnbull says Savvy has already had 10,000 passengers since November. Workers at Littleton Port Company will resume strike action at midnight tonight after employment talks failed to reach an agreement today. The port company says the Rail and Maritime Transport Union does not want parity with the other major union at the port. It wants an unfair advantage over it. It says RMTU members want the same salary increase their Maritime Union of New Zealand colleagues received, but without making the roster changes MUNZ accepted a year ago. It says the port wants to stop the enormous disruption the RMTU strikes will have on shipping lines, importers and exporters. It's nearly 5 past 5. To sport now, and the West Indies have held the White Ferns to a 135 for 6 in the third T20 cricket match in New Plymouth. It's the home side's lowest total of the series so far. New Zealand currently lead the 5-match series 2-0. A short time ago, West Indies with the bat were 97 for 4 after 15 overs. The Silver Ferns list of injured players continues to grow, with defender Tamalisi Whakahokoto in doubt with an ankle sprain on the eve of the Tiny Jameson Trophy netball series against Jamaica, Malawi and Fiji. She was left to watch today's training session from the sideline on crutches. Head coach Janine Salvey says although Whakahokoto is an integral part of their team with the Commonwealth Games looming, their planning means they're prepared for anything.
We know when we go to Commonwealth Games we can't make changes, we can't bring other players in, so you've got to deal with what you've got. And learning from 2014 and talking to Y and her team about that is that you've just got to be prepared for anything. They had a number of that happen to them in Glasgow, so we've certainly looked at and sat down and what if this happens and what if this happens once we get beyond the change zone.
Janine Salby there, and the Silver Ferns will open their Tiny Jameson Trophy campaign tomorrow night against Malawi at the North Shore Event Centre. That's the news.
Tragic loss.
It's a complete and utter tragedy, and every time someone is killed on the tracks it is a complete waste. But the message is tracks are for trains. You wouldn't think of walking down the middle of a state highway.
Loss of business.
Ports of Auckland allows the cruise line to tell it who should be given clearance to the terminal. Operators who haven't done a deal with the cruise line don't get in there.
Karori loses a creche.
We have made the difficult decision to close that creche, but our plunket nurse will still operate out of that building. Our services are still there.
Don't snooze and lose. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Make It Wood, the campaign encouraging business and government to use responsibly sourced wood as a building material. And after 10, renowned American political consultant and Republican pollster Frank Luntz. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast taking us through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine spells and the odd shower as well. Waikato to Kapiti, that includes central high country. Mainly fine. Isolated afternoon and evening showers north of Taihape. Cloud increases elsewhere late tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, fine for the rest of today. Cloudy with a few showers developing in Wellington in the morning tomorrow, spreading to South Wairarapa later. Nelson and Bulla, fine spells. Isolated showers turning to rain in Bulla tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, rain south of the glaciers spreading north today, turning to showers in the south later tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Scattered rain spreads north tomorrow. Cold southerlies. Southland and Otago, scattered rain in Southland. That spreads north tonight. Rain becomes widespread tomorrow. Cold southerlies. Snow down to 600 metres overnight. And cloudy periods with a chance of a shower at the Chathams. It is 8 minutes past 5.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul Brennan, and thank you everyone for being with Checkpoint. The country's largest general insurance company, IAG, is to enforce the June 30 deadline on filing court proceedings against it in response to disputed insurance claims arising from the February 2011 Christchurch earthquake. This will be done under the Limitation Act, which restricts legal claims to no more than 6 years after the date of, and I quote, the act or omission on which the claim is based. In this case, it's the earthquake itself. IAG had previously extended its deadline until June 30, but today confirmed to Checkpoint it will not extend it again. Southern Response has a September 4 deadline at the moment. This means that if you're an IAG customer or go over cap with EQC on an old claim and find yourself dealing with IAG, you will have no recourse to the courts in case of dispute. At the moment, the Christchurch High Court's earthquake litigation list records 500 active claims relating to earthquake damage. The Christchurch lawyer acting for claimants against EQC and all major insurance companies says post-June 30 looms as, I quote, a bloody mess. And Peter Woods, litigation partner at Anthony Harper, believes where there are claims that started under cap, but after a dispute with EQC moved over cap, if IAG won't give a customer their day in court, they will look back at EQC.
Well, I think EQC is going to be exposed to the total claim. If they aren't able to process these homeowners' claims within the limitation period, then a homeowner will be entitled to go back to them and say, well, look, I'm in this predicament because of your failure to meet your statutory obligations, your failure to assess the damage properly and your failure to repair it, then EQC, you're on the hook for the full amount. And there are potentially thousands of claims out there. We know there's about 1,500 remedials that are with EQC at the moment. But there's a lot of people who will have trusted EQC to do the job properly, but they will find out, particularly for pre-1970s homes, that the job hasn't been done properly, and they've got a real problem with their foundations. And that's what we're seeing. And in every case, those claims have gone over cap. Those claims are very serious. And those homeowners, if their insurer says to them, well, you're too late, they'll go back to EQC and say, well, you're on the hook for the full amount.
IAG and Southern Response, of course, say that they will still settle claims. The issue is if there is a dispute around settlement. And if we look at the Christchurch High Court litigation list, at the moment, IAG are named as a defendant in multiple claims, very many. Some of them protracted. So if you can't get into court with IAG and or Southern Response, and therefore you can't dispute your settlement, what position does this leave you in law?
Well, that issue, it seems to be inequitable, doesn't it? That EQC, which is an insurer, can be negligent, breach of its statutory duty, breach of its contract with the homeowner, and let time expire so that, in effect, you're deprived of your right to a full claim. That seems inequitable, and I think there'd be a good argument in court that EQC is on the hook for the full amount.
And you believe, in good faith, having seen in excess of 200 cases yourself, that there may potentially be thousands of homeowners in this position?
I think there are potentially thousands of homeowners in this position, and they're the ones with pre-1970s homes with rubble foundations. So that means it's a perimeter ring, a concrete perimeter ring, which isn't really made of concrete. In the old days, they could fill it with all sorts of stuff, and they're known as rubble foundations, been recognised as rubble foundations. But unfortunately, EQC treated them as if they were modern concrete foundations, and they've really messed that up. It's a bloody mess. It really is.
And if it is a bloody mess, this is only part of the picture. Your work, the Christchurch High Court lists 316 cases against EQC alone, hundreds of cases against private insurers. And they are only a reflection of people who know about the damage, who have some form of dispute because they know what position they're in. What we're learning from the onslaughts is there are a whole lot of people who have no idea what damage lies beneath their floors, particularly in foundations. What's their position?
Well, the frustrating thing is EQC is likely to know who those people are. I'm sure they will have done modelling and they'll have their figures just as to how many rubble foundation claims they handled or mishandled, and they're just relying on the people who've approached them with the remedial requests. They're not going out to those that they know or EQC knows have not been done correctly and telling them, hey, look, you need to investigate this. We need to reassess your property. And those people who don't know at the moment and EQC aren't telling may not find out until they come to sell their house in a few years' time when someone says to them, sorry, I'm not going to buy your house because your foundations are stuffed.
So what's EQC's obligation in those circumstances?
Legally, I don't think it is obliged to go to those people. Morally, I think as a state service, it knows it's messed that up. It should be approaching those people rather than just leaving them to rot.
That's Peter Woods. IAG declined an interview, but when we had the IAG confirmation and we knew we were talking to Peter Woods, we called EQC for a response. Given there's a new chair, a new minister and a review going on, we expected a statement indicating a response or a solution was being formulated. But we were offered an interview with EQC Sid Miller, so I asked him what would he say to IAG customers who appear about to lose their right to take the insurer to court.
Well, I cannot comment specifically on IAG's approach. What I can say is that the limitation period does not extinguish the claim entitlements, or it only restricts the court action, as you've said. And what that means from an EQC point of view is that homeowners can continue to log claims, and we will continue to settle them. However, they don't have the option of the court action at the end. But our focus is very much on settling the claims.
Right. If we look at the last 12 months, 793 claims went over cap in the past 12 months. And they are going to end up with insurers, and increasingly the insurers are going to say, we will not see you in court. In other words, there is no recourse to legal action. Now, there are currently 500 open claims before the courts in Christchurch. Surely people who have a dispute with their insurer deserve their day in court.
Again, I cannot comment on the private insurers. I do know that ourselves and the private insurers, will work together to ensure settlement of those claims, but I cannot comment on what their legal approach is.
What say, though, people are falling outside the limitation period because of failings by EQC, an incorrect scope, an inadequate assessment, poor repair work? Doesn't the buck stop with you if people are missing their limitation period because EQC didn't get it right in the first instance?
Well, what we apply for our what we apply for our limitation period is that it's 6 years after the settlement of the latest repair. So, and that includes re-repairs. So the way we run it is it relates to the claim, and then the latest work that's been undertaken on that claim, and then it's 6 years after that. By law, we can only pay up to the EQC cap, and that's what we will do.
Yes, the point is that, and you and I talked about this last week, or 2 weeks ago, and you very decently listened to a whole lot of people describe their experiences of EQC, make assessments that were fundamentally flawed. They start off under cap because EQC has missed substantial and expensive structural damage. Some years later, they find out they are going over cap. They then end up with an insurer, IAG, June 30, Southern Response, September 4th, who says, no, we will not see you in court, and we believe this is pre-existing damage, or we believe this is shoddy workmanship by EQC. Off you go. What do they do in those circumstances?
Well, I think if relating to the EQC piece, if they have a concern around their limitation period with respect to EQC, then please contact us. We can making a request for an extension to that limitation period. In terms of it's with their private insurer, then I would encourage people to contact their private insurer and have that discussion with them.
Sorry, I'm obviously not explaining myself very well. What say inadequate assessments by EQC means that by the time they get to their private insurer, the limitation period is over. And the private insurer says this is down to poor workmanship or poor assessment or poor scoping by EQC, and we are offering you little or nothing. In fact, we don't even really want to deal with you, and we don't have to see you in court because the limitation period is over. What happens then?
Well, I think they've still got an obligation to settle the claim, and that's why we're working with them in terms of dealing with what is going to go over cap, and then how do we address those. So this comes back to the Limitation Act just restricting the court action piece, but the focus is still very much on settling claims.
If the focus, look, I absolutely hope you're right, but there are currently 500 active cases before courts in Christchurch. And so it would seem inevitable that there are going to be continued disputes between people who are insured and their insurers. The problem is that come June 30, if your insurer is IAG, you're not going to be able to dispute with them. Now, if you've missed the limitation period because EQC didn't do its job correctly in the first instance, what do you do?
Well, that's where I come back to, Johnny. Our focus is still very much on settling those claims. And I can't comment on IAG's approach, but I do know that we continue to work with them to ensure that we can get a settlement.
Sid Miller, CEO of EQC. Now, after that interview, an insider told me EQC is stuck between a rock and a hard place. They can't pay out over cap, and they can't compel the insurer to do anything. So we will seek comment from the Minister about what happens next. A bloody mess after June 30, says Peter Woods. It's a long way from Waikato to the White House, but Matamata-born businessman Chris Liddell has managed to secure a top spot among Donald Trump's staff. The 59-year-old former Microsoft and General Motors executive has been appointed Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Coordination, tasked with overseeing and coordinating Mr Trump's policy process. And as Nita Black-Person reports, it could be potentially good news for New Zealand's relationship with the US.
When Chris Liddell's promotion was announced, Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka tweeted her congratulations to her amazing friend and colleague, giving some insight into just how close he is to Trump's inner circle. Speaking to TVNZ shortly after Mr Trump was elected president, Mr Liddell said he was going to be a different president from what people were used to.
If you want to take an optimistic view, and I'm optimistic, I think he will actually come up with some policies that both sides will be willing to look at. Now, not all of them are going to be popular. Things like he will be anti-trade, for example, but infrastructure spending, he's probably likely to have that as part of one of the things that he's going to be doing initially, and both sides of the aisle are likely to want to do that.
The White House is a long way from Mr Liddell's Auckland upbringing, but his former principal from Mount Albert Grammar, Morris Hall, says he was always a capable student.
He has very good planning skills, and he'll do what he sees as wise, and it probably introduces a element of stability in Trump administration, which we all wonder where it's going, don't we?
Chris Liddell was the youngest of 5 children. His father was a teacher but died when he was young, leaving his mother to work a number of jobs to support the family. The Liddells never forgot the support they received after their father's death and recently started a $1 million scholarship fund for graduates. Mr Liddell attended Auckland University and Oxford before becoming a businessman. His extensive CV includes being the CEO of forestry firm Carter Holt Harvey and the Chief Financial Officer of Microsoft and General Motors. After wrapping up at General Motors, he went on to work for Mitt Romney during his 2012 presidential race against Barack Obama. Despite not being on the winning team, he wrote a book about lessons learned.
When the Republicans got into power, someone may have read the book, and Chris had some ideas in the book. I think they tapped Chris on the shoulder and said, "You better come and give us some advice," and I think he did that. And then I think they suggested, "Well, you may better come and work for us."
Barry Brown has known Mr Liddell for 15 years and worked with him in setting up the Next Foundation, a philanthropic fund for organisations working on social and environmental projects. Mr Liddell had to stand down from the foundation when he joined Donald Trump's staff, but Mr Brown says he's passionate about American politics and will relish the new role.
He said to me once, whenever I ring someone around America, chief executive of a company, to come and have a talk about things, they usually in my office the next day.
Mr Liddell has 2 children and is married to an American, his 3rd wife, but Mr Brown says he's still very much connected to New Zealand.
He's a Kiwi at heart, and he will just do whatever he can to help this country, provided obviously it doesn't conflict with what he's doing with the White House. But if he can put a good word in for New Zealand, I'm sure he would at any time.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she's optimistic about having a New Zealander in the White House, but isn't holding her breath about what it will mean for the 2 countries.
You can always have a hope that having a New Zealander in such an important role will mean, of course, our relationship is strengthened. But look, I hold no expectation. He has a much wider job to do than just to sit and advocate for New Zealand and the United States.
And given the revolving door of staff in Donald Trump's administration, there are no guarantees on how long Chris Liddell will be in the job. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Black-Person, aho.
The government may consider a total ban on set net fishing after 5 endangered Hector's dolphins were killed in a single net. The deaths were discovered a month ago off Banks Peninsula on the east coast of the South Island, where it's estimated there are only 9,000 of the dolphins left in total. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
The Minister of Fisheries, Stuart Nash, was informed about the deaths 11 days ago. Keenly aware of the negative public reaction that would flow from news that 5 endangered dolphins had been killed in a single incident, he spent the past week getting his ducks in a row before going public. Today, he said the fisher involved had been profoundly affected by the incident, which involved the use of a set net, an indiscriminate form of fishing blamed for the deaths of many Hector's dolphins.
I think everyone acknowledges an absolute tragedy the fact that 5 Hector's dolphins were caught in a set net, to the point where the fisherman himself is so distressed he's giving up set netting and he's going to catch his quota on long lines. Both the Minister and I think every New Zealander watching this will agree that 5 dolphins caught in one net at one time is unacceptable.
Standing next to him was Minister of Conservation Eugenie Sage, who said a ban on set nets was long overdue.
Well, we could certainly follow overseas examples in California, where they've banned them to protect turtles and seabirds, in Finland to protect their seal. Yes, there's a lot of evidence that's showing that set nets are an indiscriminate method. They catch dolphins and seabirds. I think it's long overdue that we look to phase them out.
Stuart Nash appeared to agree on the need for a ban.
All credit to the fisherman. He did report these. There wasn't a camera or an observer on his boat, so he did the right thing. But as the Minister mentioned, this isn't his fault. He was fishing, as we understand, legally. He was using a legal method, but perhaps that method now needs a much greater level of scrutiny on whether it's appropriate in the 21st century.
But he said the 300 fishers that depend on set netting for their living needed to be consulted first as part of a review of the 10-year-old threat management plan that covers the dolphins.
So we need to understand the consequences on them. We need to understand, there's just a whole lot of evidence we need to do before we make a decision. And I think everyone would appreciate that. You just can't make a decision based on one incident.
It was the second time the fisher had caught a Hector's dolphin in his net, but the first time he'd ended up with 5 of them. He first went to the industry group Fisheries Inshore with the news. Its chief executive, Jeremy Helson, says his members have already voluntarily closed set net fishing in Southland in order to preserve endangered yellow-eyed penguins, and may consider doing the same around Banks Peninsula.
We welcome those sorts of initiatives, and we'd certainly look at similar sorts of initiatives around Banks Peninsula, but as I said, we really don't want to preempt the outcomes of the threat management plan.
Jeremy Helson says there are already large parts of the coast that are subject to set net bans, including up to 4 nautical miles off Banks Peninsula. He notes the 5 dolphins were captured just outside this zone.
So there's a huge amount of area that there's no risk at all, and that's primarily where the dolphins live. So it's thinking about that residual risk and what might be appropriate to do to further manage that.
The government hopes to start consulting on a possible set net ban and the role cameras could play in reducing captures by June or July. For Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tēnei.
The government has announced plans for a review, a working group, an advisory group or an investigation on average every 4 days since it took power. Dr Bryce Edwards, a political scientist who was once a Greens staffer, says that's the government's way of kicking tough issues to touch, which he says is inexcusable given Labor had 9 years in opposition to develop policies. Zach Fleming investigates.
The government has set up a working group to look at industrial relations in the film industry.
New Zealand First says its bill to establish a KiwiSaver working group is not a waste of Parliament's time.
The chair of the new NCEA Review Advisory Group, Jeremy...
Government ministers have announced plans for 39 reviews, working groups, advisory groups or investigations since they took office. That's 1 every 4 days. They include a review into how Australia and New Zealand can better work together, a Dairy Industry Restructuring Act review, a review of insurance laws, abortion laws, copyright law, a review of the Waste Minimisation Act, a Digital Economy and Digital Inclusion Advisory Group, an independent expert advisory panel for Phase 1 of the review of the Reserve Bank Act, an NCA Advisory Group, a Public Media Funding Commission Advisory Group. And the real number of reviews, working groups, advisory groups and investigations underway is actually higher than 1 every 4 days. For this story, Checkpoint is only counting ones announced by ministers. So, for example, the State Services Commission investigation into security firm Thompson & Clark isn't included.
Modern politics is obsessed with taking the safe approach. Political parties never want to go out on a limb. They don't want to be the leaders, in a sense, of pushing new policies. They really want to keep things safe.
And one way of keeping themselves safe, political scientist Bryce Edwards says, is by kicking it to touch, announcing a review or a working group instead of what could be controversial policy. Here's Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis announcing a freedom camping working group earlier this month.
Would you consider changing the law so that there is one law for all councils rather than this piecemeal approach there is at the moment?
Well, that's something that the working group will probably examine.
So what happens in the meantime?
Well, that's what the working group will be getting together and talking about what we can do.
National were just as guilty as this back when they came into power in 2008. They set up probably a similar amount of working groups and panels and independent reviews as we're seeing under this Labor government. So it does seem to be a disease that is spreading to all governments.
In November 2010, then Deputy Labour leader Annette King issued a press release saying the national government was struck down by review-itis. Mrs King said National had launched 87 in 2 years and called for action over reviews. It's tough for families and more reviews won't help them, she said. We asked her to comment for the story. She declined. A perfect example is Cody Dieback. National reviewed the program and now Labour is reviewing it too. Yes, there are problems and the current approach isn't working, but Forest and Birds Central North Island manager Rebecca Sterneman says more action's needed alongside a review.
Their original working group had a research plan and a review of what needed to occur, and that wasn't implemented. There are issues, but the forest doesn't have time for a review. It needs urgent action.
Easily the most well-known of Labour's groups is the Tax Working Group. Here's Finance Minister Grant Robertson when he announced it pre-election.
Today we released Labour's tax plan. It doesn't contain any new policy, but it does clarify some aspects of the Tax Working Group.
No new policy.
They don't want to go into the campaign tied down to particular policies which then they'll be expected to follow.
The tax working group is a perfect example of that, right? They went from capital gains tax to, that's not quite that popular, not as popular as we thought, so let's go with the working group.
Exactly. Labour in particular just kicked for touch, and they wanted a safe way to campaign without necessarily alienating any voters.
But Dr Edwards says that's inexcusable.
And there's absolutely no reason that the tax working group that's now been established by this government couldn't have been done in opposition. It doesn't need the executive powers to appoint those people and to consult with those people and get them to come up with ideas.
So what do voters think?
It's better to plan. Because you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Right. So I would say they're doing a great job of planning.
You don't think they could have planned in the 9 years in opposition?
Jacinda wasn't, this is her plan, and she didn't have that long.
If it's like that, it's a bit hard to understand what you voted for and what they're actually doing. I suppose that I had that view about the sort of tax working group as well. I just wanted a statement for the investigation work to have been done already, for there to be a statement or a policy at the time of the election, and then I'll want to be able to vote on it. We
put that to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, that perhaps a working group, advisory group, investigation or review every 4 days is too many.
Look, ultimately all of these are our way of saying, look, we want to bring external advice in. Governments do this work continually. We just happen to have made a few more of ours public and open.
Wouldn't it be better to spend the money on actually getting stuff done?
Well, by and large we have. Of course, if you take into account our record across the 100-day plan, we brought in place a mini budget because we were enacting so quickly so much of the agenda that we had. Look, this initial flush is an initial flush.
But if frustration with the way our politicians are operating bubbles over, Dr Edwards says we could see an anti-establishment politician rise in popularity in New Zealand, like Donald Trump did in the US. Because if people don't know what a working group will recommend, how can they vote for it?
It does look very cosy for a lot of voters. It does look like it's really just Wellington people talking to Wellington people, making deals behind the scene, coming up with what they think is going to be best for the political party in power. And it just doesn't look very democratic. It doesn't look very consultative. And I think it is actually quite bad for democracy when there's too much of this.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Coming up on Checkpoint, all tests of self-driving cars are suspended by Uber after the death of a pedestrian in Arizona. Taranaki locals worry about the future of oil and gas exploration in the region, and a town once known for mining gold gets into the business of liquid gold. Yep, a new whiskey distillery in Reefton could create up to 50 jobs. Nona has business next, but before it all, joining us from Wellington, newsreader Paul Brennan.
Thank you, John. In our headlines, an attack by the Cabinet Minister Shane Jones has prompted Air New Zealand to warn the government it will always act independently of the Crown. The airline's chairman, Tony Carter, says any appearance of a lack of commercial independence is viewed seriously by the board. The government may consider a total ban on set nets after 5 endangered Hector's dolphins were killed in a single net. The deaths were discovered when a fisher pulled up the nets just north of Banks Peninsula. It's estimated there are only 9,000 of the dolphins left. The Taranaki Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive says the message the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is sending oil and gas companies could be devastating to the regional economy. Jacinda Ardern has accepted a petition calling for an end to oil exploration. Arun Chowdhury says the oil and gas sector generates thousands of jobs in the region. The advisory group on the new Dunedin hospital says it sent its site recommendation to the government. The group's chairperson, Pete Hodgson, will not give any details except to confirm the site fits the criteria of being on flat land in the central city between the Octagon and the current hospital site. Workers at Lyttelton Port Company will resume strike action at midnight after employment talks failed today. The port company says the Rail and Maritime Transport Union does not want parity with the other major union at the port. It wants an unfair advantage over it. The police are concerned for an Auckland man missing since last week. David Benny, who is 29 years old, was last seen in the settlement of Waiatorua near the Waitakere Ranges shortly before 8 a.m. last Thursday. And a 6-year-old boy has died and 3 other people are in hospital after a ute went down a bank in the Rangatike district this afternoon. The crash happened on Turakina Valley Road between Kawekeke Road and Bald Hill Road at 2:15. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update will be at 6.
Which is only about 24 minutes away. Thank you, Paul. Nona is beside me. Nona Peltier. Kathmandu. Good first half result, good profit result, right?
Yeah.
And now they're going to spend some of the money buying a US footwear company.
They are indeed, and this is one of the companies that have been a supplier to them for about 10 years. It's called Osbo. Is that right?
I don't know.
Oh, Obos.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to do that. Yeah. Obos is the name of the company, and it makes footwear in the United States, and it's been an exclusive supplier to Kathmandu in this region, and now the company's bought. Kathmandu's bought it.
So they're a footwear manufacturer, right?
Yeah, they also source products as well, but they're a wholesaler.
Okay, so they don't. So this isn't Kathmandu getting a retail chain in the US. This is just them getting more product.
Yeah, and this is a wholesale company, so I don't know to what extent they manufacture, but they design footwear for the market that Kathmandu serves. So it's a great fit for them, so to speak.
Gold, no.
Anyways, they're going to sell their products. That's going to help them expand their products, Kathmandu products, into the North American market, where this company, Obos, has a very strong market share. Yeah.
Wow. So Kathmandu are ambitious. They're making money. They're expanding, they're getting into new markets and new ranges. Things are looking good for them, aren't they?
Yes, well, they've met their expectations on profit. They got their debt down to a really low level. They're in a very strong position with their balance sheet, so they're looking for opportunities and building market share.
And they managed to do this while always being in sale.
Yes, that's right. And not only that, they're buying this company for $60 million US, and their company's shares are in a trading halt while that deal goes through.
Thanks, Linda. ANZ says it's considering a share float for UDC. Gosh, UDC.
Yes. Yeah, now that's it. We had them. They were pushed back last year by the Overseas Investment Office. They were trying to sell it to a Chinese outfit, and there wasn't enough information, so they said, well, no, sorry, that deal can't go through. So I guess ANZ's still quite determined to, be
rid of.
That's a really good word for it, but it's true. And now they're looking at an initial public offering. Now, we couldn't get the bank to talk about what's behind this or, what their plans are, but they're saying they've just sort of basically raised the flag and said that they're going to look at doing this. We're not sure why they're doing that you would have thought they'd been able to find a buyer, but the Commerce Commission pushing back on mergers and acquisitions, perhaps the market's just too small, and maybe people are concerned that the Commerce Commission will push back on them too, because we have seen that recently a lot, and it could be that.
Any sense of what UDC's worth, or is that not?
Well, they thought that the company was worth $660 million. That was the deal for the Chinese company. Now, is it? Maybe they couldn't raise that money. I don't know. We'll have to find out eventually.
Thanks, Nona.
Okay, so what happened in the markets, you might ask? Okay, well, we had some pretty serious knockback in Wall Street after Facebook lost about 7% of its value. That was overnight, and that's because of the way that the market perceived potential regulation after some misuse of user information to support the Donald Trump presidential campaign.
Facebook were getting a smacking from the NASDAQ, pure and simple.
Yeah, absolutely. The market was not happy. Anyways, that spilled through really into Asia, but for some reason, our market only fell 5 points. There you go. So we were down just 5 points to 8,487. And, you know, compare that to the ASX 200, they're down 0.5%, so it's quite a lot more. Dollars trading at 72.2 US cents, 93.6 Australian, and 51.5 pence.
Nona Peltier here in the Auckland studio. Thank you very much indeed. We're playing ping pong at the moment between Auckland and Wellington. Let's go back to Wellington. Your serve, mid-service meteorologist John Law.
Kia ora. For the North Island, high pressure still just about with us. There's still a few showers to watch out for across the eastern parts of our patch out towards the likes of Gisborne and Hawke's Bay and possibly even the eastern side of the Auckland region. Highs here though, still 24 degrees Celsius and plenty of dry weather across much of the North Island. But we'll find areas of cloud and that cloud thickening up for the likes of, say, New Plymouth as we head through the afternoon. Highs there, 21 degrees Celsius. We're going to find that cloud, though, more of an issue the further south we go down in towards those lower parts of the North Island towards Wellington. The cloud thickening up through the daytime and by the end of the day, some wetter weather as well. Some showers feeding up from the south. And that even extends up towards the likes of Paraparaumu as well. There's more cloud on that eastern coast for Hawke's Bay and up towards Gisborne. A few showers still to watch out for, becoming more confined to Gisborne by the afternoon. But generally it's a wetter day down on the south line with rain moving northwards as we head through the daytime. Some heavier falls making their way up in towards parts of Canterbury, but it is looking like some fairly wet weather for that western coast once again through Westland and Fiordland, but also down across the southern parts of our country, down towards Southland and up in towards Otago as well. And behind this system, some much cooler air as well. And that's it from me.
Looks like some reasonable rain coming for the south of the south. Thank you, John. All tests of self-driving cars have been suspended by Uber after a female pedestrian was killed in Arizona. It's the first fatality caused by an autonomous car and could deal a big blow to the burgeoning industry. Bridget Burke reports.
Uber has suspended its self-driving car program after one of its autonomous SUVs struck and killed a woman in Arizona.
There was a pedestrian that was walking a bicycle from the west side of the road to the east side of the road. Once that vehicle got into the lane of traffic of the vehicle, once the pedestrian got into the lane of traffic with the vehicle struck the pedestrian, at which time she was transported to a local area hospital and was pronounced deceased at the hospital.
Tempe Police Sergeant Ronald Alcock said at the time of the accident, the Volvo XC90 SUV was in autonomous mode, travelling at around 60 kilometres an hour with an Uber operator behind the wheel.
Investigators were able to talk to the driver of the vehicle. The driver was identified as Rafael Vasquez, 44-year-old. Rafael was cooperative, and there was no impairment shown for the driver of the vehicle at the time. The pedestrian was identified as Elaine Herzberg, 49-year-old.
The death is the first from a self-driving vehicle, which are still in testing mode around the globe. The tragedy threatens to derail efforts to fast-track the introduction of the new technology across the United States. US transportation regulators said they were sending teams to investigate the crash. In a tweet, Uber expressed its condolences and said the company was fully cooperating with authorities. It's one of many companies racing to get self-driving cars ready for public use. The San Francisco startup has been testing specially equipped Volvo XC90 crossovers in Pittsburgh and the Phoenix area. Google's Waymo and General Motors Cruise division have also been testing their autonomous cars on public roads. Concerns over the safety of autonomous vehicles flared after a man died in Florida in 2016 while his Tesla was in autonomous mode. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
The Prime Minister's comments about the future of oil and gas exploration is causing anxiety in Taranaki, the only region in New Zealand with commercial production. Yesterday, Jacinda Ardern accepted a Greenpeace petition calling for an end to oil exploration and told protesters she's actively considering the issue. So in Taranaki, our reporter Robin Martin went to see what people think.
The Prime Minister has since clarified her comments, saying they referred to the block offer system, which is the starting point for issuing exploration permits. Regardless, the chairman of the Taranaki Engineering Consortium, Pat Hills, says speculation over the long-term future of oil and gas exploration is unsettling.
It just creates uncertainty for our members, which in turn affects your business strategies. You know, do you keep investing in, growing your talent in Taranaki for an uncertain future, or you're focusing on diversification elsewhere, perhaps?
Mr Hill says most engineering firms are busy at the moment, but an end to exploration would have an effect down the line.
Exploration tends to follow with large-scale developments. We haven't seen those developments for some time. So in terms of oil and gas exploration, for the engineering companies, there's a flow-on for us into capital projects. And that'll be the major impact over time, I think, if a decision's made.
Mr Hill says some Taranaki companies had cut staff by as much as 50% since the price of oil started falling in 2014. It tumbled from north of $100 a barrel to just $30 a barrel in 2016 and has since recovered to about $65 a barrel. Offshore exploration is believed to be considered worthwhile at $100 a barrel. The chief executive of the Taranaki Chamber of Commerce, Arun Chandarai, says talk of an end to oil and gas exploration is premature.
The time will come when we need to stop issuing permits because we'd love to see the country use more and more renewable energy. However, this is not the time because it would affect businesses and life in Taranaki very adversely.
Mr Chandarai believes gas will be an important fuel as the world transitions to a carbon-neutral economy. He says the Prime Minister's comments send the wrong message to exploration companies.
The signal to them would straight away be, okay, stop all further investment and look at getting out of this country that does not support the sector, and that would result in a massive loss of jobs.
In March 2015, a study found the oil and gas industry directly employed about 4,300 people in Taranaki and was linked to the creation of about 7,000 jobs. In the same year, it also generated $1.5 billion of GDP in the region. In a question to the Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones in Parliament today, Jacinda Ardern implied those workers shouldn't fear for their jobs, for now at least.
Supplementary.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Supplementary. Can the Minister confirm that this government has never proposed retrospective decisions and therefore won't impact on the current oil and gas industry jobs that exist today, and that even has he seen the statements by the Leader of the Opposition on the 3rd of March stating that New Zealand needed to transition away from fossil fuels?
That will have been of little comfort to the majority of people RNZ spoke to in New Plymouth today.
People think that fossil fuels are going to be out the window in 20 years. They have another thing coming.
I personally just don't think it's a good thing because it's my husband's career.
We make good money and it filters down through the province, doesn't it, eh? So guys making big money spend big money.
I think that it would be an end to a lot of jobs for a lot of people. The long-term effects on the environment aren't good and they aren't sustainable.
Meanwhile, Climate Justice Taranaki spokesperson Catherine Chung says the end to exploratory permits would represent a real breakthrough. Ms Chung challenged the Prime Minister to go further and put an end to exploratory drilling too. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Naho.
Nona spoke about this last night. It's the first case of its kind in New Zealand. The Crown arguing in court yesterday and again today that Hamish Sansom sold his shares in a company after getting a tip-off from a former colleague. But his lawyer hit back saying his client, who's accused of insider trading, made the move based on publicly available documents. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay has been listening to it all and filed this report.
The Crown prosecutor Nick Williams told the court in his opening address that Hamish Sansom once worked for the technology company eRoad. eRoad allows trucking companies to buy road user charges electronically and had recently expanded into the United States market. 4 days before the company announced a major profit loss in September 2015, Mr Sansom sold 15,000 shares. But Mr Williams said Mr Sansom only did that after getting inside information from eRoad analyst Geoffrey Honey, who'd worked with him at Vodafone and later at eRoad. 5 months after leaving eRoad, Mr Sansom received this text message from Mr Honey.
US sales not doing too well. Time to sell up, ? Confidential, obviously.
Mr Honey also sent Mr Sansom a photograph of a confidential internal eRoad report on the company's performance in the United States.
And you'll see the reply, which the Crown says is the reply from Mr Sansom. Green, you're a bad boy, ... but thanks, !
A minute later, Mr Sansom sent another message saying he was going to sell his shares anyway. In the next 2 days, Mr Sansom transferred the shares from his family trust into his personal name in order to sell the 15,000 shares online. 4 days later, EROAD told the market that its profit forecast was down.
In the announcement, EROAD said that net profit was forecast to be $500,000 for the year ended 31 March 2016, compared to a previous forecast of $5.3 million. So in fact more than 10 times lower than forecast in the offer documents.
The market reacted badly and the company's share price plummeted.
And it continued to fall over the remainder of the trading week, closing Friday 2 October 2015 at $2.60, which was a 21.7% decrease since the announcement on 28 September.
Mr Sansom's sale of his shares was picked up by the NZX investigations team and forwarded to the Financial Markets Authority. But Mr Sansom's lawyer, David Jones QC, said the Crown was trying to paint Mr Sansom as a bad man.
The defence says that is rubbish. That this man looked at the reality of publicly available material and he worked out for himself well before September of 2015 that US sales, and that's what we're talking about, US sales, were not doing very well at all.
Mr Jones said there were documents on the public record that Mr Sansom was able to access to show the true picture.
This is a case of numbers versus words, of reality versus rhetoric. That the wonderful words being spoken by the people at EROAD about how well things are doing were not borne out by the numbers. This man looked at the numbers and he worked it out for himself.
Mr Jones said his client had planned to sell his shares for months, and the text messages from Mr Honey came out of the blue. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ahi, ko Edward Gayahau.
The controversial and popular ride-sharing service Uber is heading south, announcing it will launch in Dunedin and Queenstown. In May, it will launch its Uber Eats food delivery service in Dunedin at the same time. I know some people with student children in Dunedin who may be wanting to cancel their credit cards now. So will Otago embrace the transport revolution? Ian Telfer has been gauging reaction.
The ride-sharing company, which has shaken up transportation in more than 600 cities globally, wants two more. Uber launched in Hamilton and Tauranga 2 months ago after taking hold of New Zealand's 3 biggest cities. Uber New Zealand's General Manager Richard Menzies says the time is right to head south.
We've got over 5,000 driver partners around the country already, and we think fantastic markets in Dunedin and Queenstown, obviously with tourism in Queenstown, but then in Dunedin, quite a big student population there that's got a high demand for rides, and many people find it hard to get home from the Octagon on a Saturday night, so great to give people a safe, reliable alternative.
On the streets of Dunedin today, most people were looking forward to Uber's arrival.
I think it's great. I've just moved down here from Wellington about 6 months ago and used Uber heaps of times. So, yeah, it's something that we looked at down here and realised that it wasn't here. So, yeah, really excited to see it down here.
I used to be a taxi driver, so, yeah, I don't like the Uber thingy. Never, we had to go through all the rigmarole of getting vetted and everything by the police and doing all the knowing where you're going, and they don't have to.
Yeah, Uber is just really good. I was recently in Australia and used it there. So much cheaper, easier to organise.
But taxi companies have been crying foul over Uber, whose app allows passengers to order and pay for their rides courtesy of self-employed drivers. The San Francisco-based company has had court battles around the world and a massive data breach in 2016. The Otago president of the Hospitality Association, Mark Scully, says he expects students will be the main drivers and users of Uber in Dunedin. Mr Scully says Dunedin's transport can't cope well with big events, and Uber will help on busy nights and weekends.
If I was running a local taxi company, I'm sure they'll have concerns, but it would be fair to say, from my observation, that come the busy weekends, Dunedin does not currently cope in terms of taxis later at night, or even in the daytime. I mean, even just last Saturday with the Crusaders in town, the queue in the Octagon was up to an hour, I've been told, and I certainly walked past them. It was very significant.
Queenstown might be a harder market to crack. The rapidly growing resort town's trying to attack congestion problems with $2 flat bus fares and parking price hikes. 4 months ago, the company GoBus launched its own service and app Savvy in Queenstown. a shared ride van system with flat $7 fares. Its business development director, Russell Turnbull, says Uber could make congestion worse.
Uber drivers do tend to circulate around looking for rides, waiting for their next call, and that's something that does create congestion. It doesn't actually solve it. As I say, it's another option. You know, we're watching them. We don't fear them, but we do question whether they're the right thing for Queenstown.
Customers will get to give their verdict on that when Uber launches in May, after holding information sessions for potential drivers next month. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Let's go across the South Island. It was a town once known for mining gold, but now Reefton on the South Island's west coast is getting to the business of liquid gold with a new whisky distillery set to open in the middle of the year. The Reefton Distilling Cooperative could eventually create as many as 50 jobs and is being hailed as a boon for the town, which, like many in the region, has been affected by the downturn in mining and other primary industries. Maya Burry takes a sip.
It's no secret that the West Coast is blessed with plentiful supplies of water, and the Reefton Distilling Cooperative plans to harness that in its bid to be a true grain-to-glass distillery. It intends to start producing a premium range of whisky, gin, vodka and liqueurs from its purpose-built facility this year, using locally sourced barley and other grains. Its co-founder, Patsy Bass, who was born in Reefton, says she's committed to contributing to the revitalisation of the coast, which is no longer able to rely on extraction industries for jobs.
Because we just wanted to create employment and we wanted to create a tourist attraction. And the distillery just really stuck, and everyone we talked to, every planet aligned. There was so much energy behind it that we're now at the point, post a successful capital raise, of actually creating the distillery. Getting the distillery up and running will cost more than $3 million, with nearly $1.4 million raised by selling shares to 207 investors, including many West Coast locals. Ms Bass says while the business will start with 6 staff, they expect to upscale quickly, with other business ventures in Reefton also likely. Nearly half of the town's 1,000 inhabitants who are employed are machinery operators, drivers or labourers, according to the last census. The Bulla District Mayor, Gary Howard, says new job opportunities are welcome.
Jobs are really, really important, but quality jobs that, it's actually skill-based, and there's a world demand for brewers and people associated with these microbreweries. A small number of jobs of 5, 10 and potentially 50 is great news for the Reefton area.
Patsy Bass says spirits production is still in its infancy in New Zealand, with around 45 distilleries and manufacturers, compared with around 190 craft beer breweries and 700 wineries. Ms Bass says the cooperative is refining the recipes for their spirits and says they will be using fresh West Coast water as well as locally sourced produce wherever possible.
The gin's got aromatics and things, like kawa, horapito, lemonwood. So, it's a real New Zealand flavour. Even our liqueurs, we'll be sourcing locally grown blueberries or blackberries or whatever to make those. So it's fresh, it's seasonal, it's not frozen and imported from overseas.
Michael Fraser Milne owns Whisky Galore, a supplier of single malts and Scotch blended whiskies in Christchurch. He says there's been a global whisky revival in recent years, and he's not surprised so many people like it.
Oh, that's simple. It's just the very best drink in the world. It's technically speaking and factually speaking, it is the most complex of all drinks. And that's what gets people hooked, if you like.
Mr Fraser Milne says there's been a rapid growth in the number of distilleries opening in New Zealand, and what they're bottling is flying off his shelves.
We're selling more New Zealand-made whisky now than we ever did in the shop. I think if you went back 3 years ago, you'd see there was maybe 5 or 6 whiskies from New Zealand on the shelf. I think if you look today, there's probably more like 20.
Mr Fraser Milne says he wants to offer more New Zealand whiskies to his customers, and he hopes to add the Reefton Distilling Cooperative to his list of suppliers in the future. Whisky lovers will have to wait a wee while though. Reefton Distilling says their first bottles of whisky are expected to hit the shelves by 2021. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
What a delicious prospect, and we look forward to sampling some. Not that obviously we are hinting in a passive-aggressive kind of way that we'd like to be the recipients of the aforementioned product, because that's not how Radio New Zealand behaves. So we will buy it when the time is right, but we look forward to doing so. It is 30 seconds away from 6 o'clock. I just needed to go on the record before anyone thought I was on the scrounge, because by golly, we'd get an email from the CEO if there was any of that sort of carry-on taking place on Checkpoint. It's 20 seconds away from 6 now. Paul Brennan is going to join us with his usual sartorial magnificence out of the Wellington newsroom after 6. We're going to look at Penny Bright and her house, which she is losing because she wouldn't pay her rates.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. Air New Zealand has warned the government that it will always act independently of the Crown. The Regional Economic Development Minister, Shane Jones, has publicly criticised the airline, describing it as a corporate taniwha that is shortchanging services to the regions. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Air New Zealand says a lack of commercial independence is viewed seriously by the board and could damage the interests of all shareholders, including the Crown. In a letter to the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, the airline reiterated the government has equal rights to all other ordinary shareholders. Shane Jones had referenced the Crown's 51% shareholding. Earlier this month, Air New Zealand withdrew its service into Kapiti Coast. 3 years ago, it stopped flying to Kaitaia, Whakatane, Westport and Taupō. From Parliament, May Heron.
5 endangered Hector's dolphins have been killed in a single set net off the east coast of the South Island. The deaths were discovered when a fisher pulled up nets just north of Banks Peninsula. Set netting is banned up to 4 nautical miles off the peninsula. It's understood the small dolphins, which are unique to New Zealand and number around 9,000, were caught just outside this area. A statement from Fisheries Inshore New Zealand on behalf of the fisher says he deeply regrets the capture and has stopped fishing in the area. The Minister of Fisheries and Minister of Conservation are now considering measures to prevent more dolphin deaths, including reviewing the use of set nets in a bid to reduce or phase them out completely. The Chief Executive of the Taranaki Chamber of Commerce says the message the Prime Minister is sending oil and gas companies could be devastating to the regional economy. Jacinda Ardern has accepted a Greenpeace petition calling for an end to oil exploration and told protesters she is actively considering the issue. Arun Chowdhury says this could have unintended consequences.
The signal to them would straight away be, okay, stop all further investment and look at getting out of this country that does not support the sector.
Mr Chowdhury says the oil and gas sector directly employs about 4,300 people in the region and generates about another 7,000 jobs. During question time in Parliament today, Jacinda Ardern implied people employed in the sector at the moment did not have to fear for their jobs. A 6-year-old boy has died and 3 other people are in hospital after a ute went down a bank in the Rangatiki district this afternoon. Police say 1 person in the ute had to be winched out by helicopter. The crash happened on Turakina Valley Road between Kauaikeke Road and Bald Hill Road. There were no other vehicles involved and the crash is being investigated. New Zealand's anti-blasphemy laws are to be done away with. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has introduced new legislation repealing the decades-old law. Labor sought to scrap the crime while in opposition last year, but National blocked its attempt, saying the public should first have a say. The Crimes Amendment Bill will be considered by MPs later this year, and people will have a chance to make submissions when it goes before a select committee. The offence is punishable by up to a year in prison, but has only ever been prosecuted once in 1922 and then unsuccessfully. An aid agency working with people affected by the earthquakes in Papua New Guinea says the country needs more international help. Latest estimates report more than 250,000 people need humanitarian assistance after last month's 7.5 quake and aftershocks, which have killed at least 125 people. Care PNG's Anna Bryan says it will take up to a year for communities to recover and much more international assistance is needed.
You know, Papua New Guinea is part of the Pacific and I think it gets overlooked sometimes, but it really is in desperate need of support at the moment. I think the way that we would support our other Pacific brothers and sisters, we need that here in Papua New Guinea at the moment. I think the support from the New Zealand government, the Australian government has been great to date, but we do need that support over the coming months.
Aid worker Anna Bryan there. The police have concerns for an Auckland man missing since last Thursday. 29-year-old David Benny was last seen on Piha Road in the settlement of Waiaturua near the Waitakere Ranges shortly before 8 in the morning. The police say he often wears baggy clothing, including a zip-up hoodie and sports pants. They're concerned for his well-being and want to hear from anyone who has seen or heard from him. It's 5 minutes past 6. On to the latest sport now. The White Ferns have had a close call against the West Indies in the third T20 cricket match in New Plymouth this afternoon, coming away with the narrowest of wins. The West Indies did well to hold the home side to 135 for 6 off their 20 overs. The visitors almost chased that down, but the White Ferns took 3 wickets in the final over and the Windies came up short by 1 run. The New Zealand seam bowler Neil, much has been made about what the pink ball does differently to the red ball since its introduction to the international game in late 2015. Wagner, though, says his approach won't be changing too much.
There's a lot of talk about it, but I haven't seen it doing too much differently. I think it's the same as a red ball. It swings for periods of times and it doesn't swing for periods of time. So I guess it's just obviously identifying that periods and being as successful as you can in those times. And when it doesn't, it's obviously you keep doing the things we've been doing well.
Neil Wagner there. The Silver Ferns defender Michaela Sokolic-Beatson may make her debut sooner than expected after Timelisi Whakahukatal suffered a sprained ankle ahead of the Tiny Jameson Trophy Series tomorrow. Coach Janine Southby says the chance of her taking the court is unlikely, and with Kayla Cullen ruled out, the new recruit has an opportunity to step up.
I guess for her it may come sooner than it was going to. In our camp she's been really promising. You know, she wants to learn, she's like a sponge, she just asks lots of questions and she's worked really hard to make sure she's up to speed with all of the game plan and what we're working on, and really enjoying having her in the group.
Janine Southby. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our soil scientist Louis Schipper has been thinking about soil quality. Although what's good for pushing up daisies might not be so handy for growing trees. Louis has the dirt after the news at 7. And speaking of dirt, William Ray leads a panel of historians through a discussion on a Kiwi black sheep, the pirate Charlotte Badger, although I have to warn you, there's more than several shades of grey about her story.
And on Lately at 10, we're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Weather now, the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow from our Met Service, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine spells and isolated showers. Waikato through to Kapiti, that includes the central high country. Mainly fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers north of Taihape. Cloud increases elsewhere late tomorrow. Wairarapa and Wellington, fine for the rest of today. Cloudy with a few showers developing in Wellington in the morning tomorrow, spreading to South Wairarapa later. Nelson and Bulla, fine spells, isolated showers, turning to rain in Bulla tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, rain south of the glaciers, spreading north today, then turning to showers in the south later tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, scattered rain spreading north tomorrow, cold southerlies. Southland and Otago, scattered rain in Southland, spreading north tonight. Then rain becomes widespread tomorrow, cold southerlies, snow down to 600 metres overnight. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the chance of a shower. It's 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul Brennan. This is a name that always gets the texts coming in. An Auckland veteran activist, Penny Bride, who's been in a standoff with the Auckland Council for 10 years over unpaid rates, has admitted she doesn't pay her water charges either. Ms Bride says she found out in a letter from the High Court last week that her $1 million Auckland home will be sold to recover more than $30,000 in unpaid rates and penalty fees. But she told our producer Bridget Burke the house is now on a restricted water supply.
For sale by tender. Just one careful owner since 1990, activist Penny Bright's School Road home in the Auckland suburb of Morningside is officially on the market after a High Court judgment ruled her home must be sold to pay her unpaid rates.
In my view, it's just so profoundly unfair. What have I done that is so bad to deserve my house being sold when all I've done is made, well, arguably quite a brave stand in terms of disputing and refusing to pay rates until the books are open, but I've always undertaken to pay my outstanding rates.
The reluctant vendor has been embroiled in a standoff with the Auckland Council since 2007. The $34,000 she now owes on the freehold property includes penalties.
The key thing here is that my house will not be sold I am not moving, and what will be happening is massive pressure will go on the Mayor and Auckland councillors to instruct the CEO to stop the sale, to stop the legal proceedings and to open the books.
If someone wants to buy that house, will it come with you? Is that what you're saying, Penny?
I don't believe it will get to that stage. I am not going anywhere.
The home now has a registered valuation of more than $1 million, almost 7 times what Ms Bright paid for it nearly 30 years ago.
$144,500.
Do you have money to pay those rates?
No, I do not.
And you don't want to anyway, even if you did have the money, because you could mortgage your home and pay the rates, but that's not the point for you, is it?
My point is that because of the stand that I've made through disputing and refusing to pay rates over the issue of lack of transparency in council contracting, it has helped put a huge public spotlight on the issue. And
so, Penny,
I'm doing what I did.
Are you afraid if you pay your rates, people won't show you any attention anymore?
I will undertake to pay my outstanding rates when the issue I've been campaigning on over the last 10 years is finally fulfilled, that the books are open and in a proper way. We can check for value for money with rate spending on private contractors and consultants by actually knowing where exactly the money's going.
Let's talk about value for money. You've got 4 bedrooms. Are they all on the one level?
I'm not going there.
Your house might well be sold, Penny, and with respect, I must urge you to focus on that as a worst-case scenario. Your home of nearly 30 years that you own freehold, that you've built up to be your home, your place where you do your reading and your research so that you can perform your public interest role. What is it going to be like when someone comes along and says, we've got an open home, could you please make yourself scarce, Penny? I want to show through purchases.
I don't believe it'll get to that stage. I am absolutely going nowhere. There'll be nobody coming into my house.
Will there be open homes?
Well, I'm sorry, they won't be because, I will not allow it, and I believe that I'll have other people that would help stop that. I don't think it'll get to that stage, actually.
The Auckland Council clearly disagrees. It says selling Ms Bright's home is a last resort after exhausting all other avenues. It's appointed a real estate agency to market her 4-bedroom bungalow.
Apparently, it's Barfoot and Thompson.
So when will they be taking photos? This afternoon for their catalogue?
Absolutely not.
They'll be wanting to video the interior of your house. That's all the rage now for real estate, is to put little videos on Facebook.
That can be all the rage, but I put out a call to Barfoot and Thompson. I suggest that you take the precautionary approach and do not get involved in anything precipitous here, because this sale is not going ahead and it is not going to be a good look for Barfoot and Thompson to be involved in this huge public interest case. So Barfoot and Thompson, I do hope you're listening, and I say this in a friendly and constructive way. I'm not going anywhere and this house is not going to be sold. Thank you.
Penny, does your house have running water?
Yes, it does.
Do you pay your water bill?
That's another issue. The water is currently restricted. That's the arrangement with Watercare. So it's a little bit like camping inside your house, actually.
So when you say that it's a bit like camping inside your house, is that sort of talking more to the indoor-outdoor flow of the property?
It's regarding the restricted water supply.
Because it seems that you don't pay for the disposal of your rubbish and all the other council amenities provided, nor do you pay for your water. Will there be running water in that house for the purchaser?
There isn't going to be a purchaser, so it's not going to be a problem.
Penny Bright refused to give us any information about the size of her section.
I really would prefer not to be looking at how desirable my house is for a potential buyer. I would prefer not to go down that track.
Does it have off-street parking?
Not going there.
Is it close to public transport?
If people are interested, they can have a look for themselves.
Has it undergone any renovations?
Like I said, I prefer not to go there.
Tenders for Miss Bright's home close on April 24th. If an arrangement between the council and Miss Bright is not met between now and then, the council will recover her rates and penalties through the sale, and she would receive the rest of the proceeds.
I bought this house because I liked where it was and what it is, and that is still the case, and I'm not going anywhere, and nobody is buying this house.
For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
It is 6:14. Shane Jones serving it up to Air New Zealand. Air New Zealand responding from board level. Peter Mathewson, one of the many listeners who's been in touch with us about the issue of Air New Zealand since we started covering their withdrawal from Kapiti a couple of weeks ago, says via email, the comments from Air New Zealand display an outrageous level of arrogance. Air New Zealand had to be bailed out by the taxpayer following disastrous mismanagement under privatised commercial control. It is well overdue time to put the public back into public transport. Air New Zealand should be put under some kind of charter, prevented from abandoning Kapiti and required to restore services to other regional centres they have abandoned in recent years, all at affordable cost. Yes, to Westport, the far north Whakatane, I think, lost Air New Zealand services. We wanted to talk to Air New Zealand about this, but no one is available for an interview. We will keep trying, though. 6:15. MPs faced off this afternoon in the first question time in Parliament. This takes place at 2 p.m. since the Green Party took the unprecedented step of handing many of their questions over to the opposition. The Greens say the gesture is designed to increase scrutiny on both them and their government partners, and they can handle it. Our political reporter Craig McCulloch sat in on day one of the new arrangement.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Does she stand by all her statements?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, in the context in which they were given.
A typical start to a typical question time. Nationals leader Simon Bridges had promised to use his extra arsenal of questions to hold the government to account, and so began a scattergun attack.
Does she stand by her statements that, quote, we have set a high bar, end quote, for spending taxpayers' money? And if so, did the fact that 8 ministers flew to the Chathams to open a wharf last week meet that bar?
Mr Speaker, each of them undertook their own work while they were there for the opening of the wharf, and so it was a productive day for each of them.
Can she confirm that all 8 ministers voted against the new wharf when National put aside funding for it in the budget last year?
Mr Speaker, I think you'll find they voted against giving $400 million to the top 10% of earners and would stand by that.
Simon Bridges also took aim at the Defence Minister Ron Mark's use of military helicopters.
Has she given the advice to Jenny Salisa that one way to reduce her spending on Crown cars is simply to ring Ron here and get them to pick her up from her place?
And the National leader asked the government exactly how many trees it had planted so far of the $1 billion it's promised.
I hope the member would know enough to know that planting in the middle of summer is not a good idea.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was on less certain ground when it came to Labour's KiwiBuild plan. A similar question, exactly how many houses had the government built so far?
KiwiBuild obviously takes time to ramp up. We've got a goal of 16,000 within the first 3 years. But the one thing I'm committed to is making sure you don't have people sleeping on the streets in winter, unlike under that government.
So when will the first KiwiBuild house that wasn't already planned and funded by the previous government actually get built?
Mr Speaker, as I said, announcements on that will be imminent.
From the opposition, more questions on child poverty, on Russia, on oil and gas. And from the government side, the usual patsies, the easy questions that the Greens are washing their hands of. The new commitment, though, didn't stop their leader, James Shaw, from jumping in at one point to help the Energy Minister.
Does the New Zealand energy market operate in the same way as Germany and South Australia?
Mr Speaker, a very good question.
Mr Shaw later faced questions of his own from National in his role as Climate Change Minister, a sign the opposition's not going to let the Greens off easily under their new deal. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
6:18. A prison director who ordered a strip search of more than 200 Auckland prisoners says the two inmates taking the case to court were not identified as having contraband. Arthur Taylor and Philip John Smith are in court alleging a Department of Corrections strip search was illegally carried out after some inmates attacked staff at the prison in Paremoremo. Laura Tupou has been at the High Court in Auckland and is seated beside me in the studio now. Welcome, Laura. How did this case come about?
So on the 19th of October in 2016, two prison staff were attacked by 4 maximum security inmates. Today in court they showed CCTV footage of that time. So what happened was there was an inmate standing at the grill. He asked for a mop and a bucket. 2 prison staff walked over to give it to him. As they opened the grill to pass over the mop and the bucket, 3 other prisoners jumped out and the 4 of them attacked those 2 prison staff. So within minutes, more staff came along, as you can imagine. More staff came streaming in, and there was one of the prison staff members was taken to the ground. 2 prisoners were separated and held down by officers, and another one went out of view. The prison director, Tom Sherlock, was on the stand today and was cross-examined by Taylor and Smith, who a lot of people will know, and they're representing themselves at the High Court today. Mr. Sherlock said the downed officer was unconscious. He was taken to hospital with stab wounds to his head. He said the inmates had shanks which were believed to be created out of the metal from their prison-issued televisions, and they'd also been drinking homebrew, and he said he thought it was an organised attack. The day after the incident, Mr. Sherlock instructed that there would be a strip search of 209 prisoners, and that's what the issue is here. So Taylor and Smith...
The day after, 209, right.
Yep, Taylor and Smith argue it contravened the Bill of Rights, saying they weren't treated with humanity and their privacy wasn't respected, and it also contravened the Corrections Act, and they didn't have reasonable grounds for believing all 209 prisoners had unauthorised items.
OK, so that's what Smith and Taylor say. What does the prison director say, or what reason has been offered?
So Mr. Sherlock said those 4 inmates who were involved in the attack were in a gang, or are in a gang, and that they would have influence over other prisoners in those areas. So that was the reasoning. Mr. Sherlock was questioned heavily by Taylor and Smith on the stand today, and he was questioned whether he had information from intelligence about whether other people did have contraband, and he said no, but intelligence officers who were on duty at the time believed there was reason to search as well.
OK, gosh, this must be fascinating to sit on. What's happening now, and what do Smith and Taylor want?
So Smith and Taylor are seeking monetary compensation with a minimum of $600 per prisoner. What's happening now is another prisoner was in court today, questioned about going through the strip search and how he felt about that. There was also a prison officer who was in charge at the time who was questioned today, and the hearing will continue tomorrow.
Laura Tupou, who was in court today, thank you very much indeed. It's almost 22 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. There has been outrage among Tongans over an official letter purporting to ban girls at the country's state school from playing rugby and from boxing. The letter from the Ministry of Education informs staff at Tonga High School that the girls shouldn't be playing such sports because it goes against young women's dignity and Tongan culture and traditions. Sally Round reports on the reaction to the move.
Women's rights advocate Orfa Gutenbar Liki is one of those outraged at the letter. She says the thinking behind it is archaic.
It takes us right back to the thinking that education is only academic, and for girls to remain in that kind of academic lane, sports is just the alternative for boys. You know, it's really just taking us back to all the work that was done so far in trying to achieve and bring forward gender equality in Tonga.
Ms Gutenbar Liki says culture is being used as an excuse, and history is full of strong, brave Tongan women, including female athletes who've been inspirational in recent times, like New Zealand's Te Wila Fotumoala.
Te Wila, who got the female player of the tournament for the Women's Rugby League World Cup. That saw it hit Tonga last year and made a lot of people proud. I mean, to see these women excelling in sports. I mean, you look at Valerie Adams, it's kind of like this letter from the Ministry of Education has taken us 100 years backwards.
Tonga's women's sevens coach, Hoko Tuivai, says she respects tradition and culture, but times are changing. Ms Tuivai says the move will mean some girls miss out on the opportunities that rugby and other sports can provide.
It's just closing doors, closing all opportunities for women, especially leading up to Pacific Games and Olympics, as we have set our path to work toward the 2020 Olympics. And here in Tonga, women's rugby have a bigger chance to reach those international competitions than men.
Hoko Tuivai says sport can also be a unifying factor, as illustrated by last year's feats by the National Rugby League team, which triggered parades and street parties across the country. The acting CEO of the Ministry of Education in Tonga, Manu Akaola, says concerns about the impact of the recent devastating cyclone are behind the letter.
Our minister had directed that all government schools, because of the cyclone, they're not going to be involved in any sports during this term, because we have already lost enough school time, class time. So his direction is that not because we're not supportive of the sporting events, but just to make up for the lost time because of the cyclone.
Manu Akaola says he'll be checking higher up to see if the letter's instructions are really what the Education Minister intended. For Checkpoint, Sally Round.
Anger and frustration is building in the small New South Wales town of Tathra, with many residents being kept from inspecting their fire-damaged home due to an asbestos risk. Up to 70 homes were destroyed by Sunday night's raging bushfire. Local resident Tim Ray says some property owners are finding out from television and media reports as to whether their homes are still standing.
What's happening at the bottom of the roadblock at Tathra, right? They're just going, oh, you're Channel 9 or you're Channel 7, I'll go through. So what are we seeing on the news? We're seeing TV people in burnt-out houses explaining, oh, this blah, blah, blah. Where are the people whose house it is? They're here watching it, OK? And I think it's really cruel, and I think what's occurring here, and yes, there's processes, we've got to do all this stuff. I just think the people who were hit hard, you know, within 12 hours of the fire, I knew which houses were gone. How come out of all the personnel, one person can't drive through the whole place and go, number 14, gone. Number 15, yep, okay. Number 16, gone. Come and tell the people, put a big thing up. I'm sorry, we need to tell you something hard. Oh, by the way, if you just watch on the news and see if your house is gone.
Tim Ray isn't the only one asking questions as the tight-knit community comes to terms with the tragedy. Many want to know why they were given so little warning about the fire before it swept through their town. Here's the ABC's Thomas Oriti.
Tathra resident Liz Seckold is one of the lucky ones.
It is still standing.
But 69 homes aren't. And in such a small town, everyone's feeling the impact.
We all know one another and we've known each other. Well, my husband and I have known most of these people for more than 30 years. So yes, very devastating.
Regardless of their fortunes, it's still an emotional time. Even for people like Les Maley, who also has a house to return to.
When you get to my age, you don't expect things like this, but it's just great to see the community come together. It's, I suppose on the side of every negative there's a positive, and it's positive to see this community really pull together.
This bushfire spread quickly, ferociously, and according to Liz Seckold, with little warning.
We thought the sky was getting rather dark. Went out on the veranda to look behind us where the smoke seemed to be coming from, and then pretty well straight away saw flames which would have been about 2 or 3 streets away from us behind the Tathra school. So that was the only way we knew that the fire was actually right upon us.
She said there was no communication at all for several hours, leaving neighbours to pass on any news they'd heard while police and fire crews drove from home to home. But perhaps that came as no surprise to people in Tathra, because it's a well-known mobile phone black spot. And for Liz Seckold, who's also the Deputy Mayor of the Bega Valley Shire, that's not good enough for a town surrounded by bush with only a small number of ways to get out.
As a Tathra resident, and many more of us, have been pushing this for quite a long time.
Rob White shares those concerns. He owns Beach House Apartments in Tathra and decided to stay. The apartments are still standing.
Parts of Tathra, including our property, do have very poor mobile coverage, limited Telstra, no Optus and no Vodafone. I didn't receive any warnings to evacuate, but others may have.
But the Mayor of the Bega Valley Shire, Christy McBain, wants to focus on the positives.
We did have police and emergency services driving street to street in Tathra. You know, it was an old-fashioned alert system, but it worked. We have no major injuries and no deaths at this stage, so that's what we truly have to be thankful for.
A spokesman for the Emergency Services Minister, Troy Grant, has told The World Today there'll be a thorough investigation and a review of the circumstances surrounding the fire. It'll consider the causes and the response of all agencies involved.
Thomas Torici from the ABC's World Today programme. Just before we go tonight, we're getting a lot of feedback on Air New Zealand. Hi, John. Regards to criticism of Air New Zealand by Regional Development Minister Shane Jones. Some of you say that's in breach of the Cabinet manual. His criticism is quite valid in highlighting what the company is really committed to doing. Air New Zealand uses the country's name to promote its brand with the success it has in doing so profitably. High credit is a well-deserved outcome for them. Although still half owned by taxpayers, there is absolutely no social commitment to New Zealand and its people. Loyalty is not a word that figures in any discussion or decisions made by the company. People in the regions need to show support for any smaller airlines prepared to enter the market. Success by them will soon see Air New Zealand re-entering the market, so as not to be seen by the shareholders as not aware of good opportunities. Then it will be up to commuters, and ignoring the tempting fares that will definitely come, and remain loyal to those who've shown commitment at providing a service. Doing that will be the biggest put down of Air New Zealand of the way they so clearly view regional commuters, says Roger James. Ending Checkpoint for tonight. Roger, thank you, and thank you for your company. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Air New Zealand is defending its commercial independence in the face of an attack by the Cabinet Minister, Shane Jones. A set net ban is on the cards after 5 endangered Hector's dolphins died in a single net. A veteran Auckland activist about to have her house sold to settle 10 years of rates arrears admits she doesn't pay her water charges either. And the former US President Barack Obama is scheduled to arrive in Auckland late tonight. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Dateline Pacific, covering the major Pacific stories of the day.
They proceeded to torture these men by punching them, kicking them, slapping them.
He was aware that no passengers allowed on board. Weather at that time was not good. It was rough weather.
Dateline Pacific, now at 8:15 every weeknight on RNZ National.
Time for Trending now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. And an item from last Wednesday's